Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Link Podcast. Eric, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Welcome back, man.
Thanks having me back, Robbie.
Are you excited to be back?
I am so excited that it's like it's showing on my face.
You obviously like me because you're back.
Yeah. Either that I got absolutely nothing else to do, and I'm still looking for that paycheck you promised, but never mind.
Probably the second one, but that
I'll,
paycheck might have
I'll,
got
I'll
lost
accept
in the
I'll
mail.
accept contraband in absence of capital, but that's okay.
I invited you on to talk about Deep Throat, but also I wanted to get a little bit more into Watergate because it is an area I've learned obviously a lot about from the Kennedy stuff. Just kind of drifted into it. More about Nixon and things of that sort, and we tend to kind of go all over the board. It's kind of how my show goes. But who is Deep Throat and why is he controversial?
Well, the official story, which may in part be a cover story, is that he was Mark Felt, who was one of the deputy directors of the FBI. I think he was also heavily involved in the COINTELPRO programs during the 1950s and 60s that involved domestic intelligence, sabotage, and espionage against various groups, both on the left and the right. The KKK, for example, on the left, pardon me, on the right, and the civil rights movement and some anti-war movements, and of course the Communist Party and trade unions on the left. Um, and the the problem with Felt is that although he probably did most of what we thought Deep Throat did, according to Woodward and Bernstein, or Woodstein, who's the
Carl
official version
Bernstein?
of Carl Bernstein, who's the official version of all of this. And what Felt claimed to have done, when of course he came out and confessed everything, and then the book Leaked was written about him, which was somewhat critical of his account, is that he was worried about the direction that the FBI was going in, and he was worried about all the shenanigans in the Nixon administration, and he simply thought that they were in fact, Nixon and his crew were violating the Constitution by basically ordering the CIA to shut down a perfectly valid FBI investigation on a bogus claim of national security and official protection of secrets act, as the British call it. That's the British version of it. The problem, though, with that is that, first of all, Felt's own motive may have been much more careerist. He was expecting to be promoted to senior deputy director, and he didn't get that. And I believe it was William Sullivan who was promoted over him, very much to his chagrin. So it was probably a great deal of personal vengeance and private payback.
Yeah, because why wouldn't he just go to the other administration shenanigans that were going on? I mean, Nixon wasn't the only one that had shenanigans.
Absolutely not. And that, of course, that's what's one of Nixon's great defenses. I mean, it's kind of a bad defense to go into court with saying that you've killed 15 people, and I said, yeah, but I mean, tons of people have killed more than 20. So I mean, I ought to get like half the sentence of somebody who wiped out 30 people, that sort of thing. So it's sort of like it's like tainting everybody with a kind of a cosmic brush of corruption. But the main problem with it is that well, two things. One, if we read the Woodstein narrative literally, there are all kind of things that Deep Throat was doing that he could not possibly have done. Like, for example, he would have, in several places in the narrative, he would have had to have been virtually in two different places at the same time. So he would have had to bilocate. He was leaving messages for Woodward in places that messages could not be received. I mean, there was this talk about like this potted plant that was supposed to be always being shifting around. Like when he wanted to meet Bob Woodward, he would show up like at 4 a.m. in the morning and move the potted plant to a certain place so that Woodward could see it through his window and know, oh, well, Deep Throat wants to meet today at the regular place, blah, 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 stuff like that. The trouble is you couldn't see the potted plant on the basis of where it was from Woodward's apartment, right? So this sounds a little bit like a rather flaky cover story to deflect on how they were actually communicating. And another problem is that even though Felt was extremely well placed within the FBI, he simply conveyed information that he almost certainly would not have been aware of himself. So it is a very strong possibility, on the face of it at least, prima facie, that there were at least two leakers to
Okay.
Woodward, whom he conflated into a single character, although Felt was probably one of them. And the other thing is, and everyone's forgotten about this because of Daniel Ellsberg, may he rest in peace, just having recently left his mortal coil behind. With the New York Times and of course the Pentagon Papers, which of course is connected to the plumbers and the Nixon administration, the great gradual deflation of the whole regime. is that the Los Angeles Times was getting a ton of stuff that was very good and very accurate, as it turned out, from somebody else. And that person's never really been identified. And I do not believe, and now I may be wrong, but I do not believe Felt ever claimed credit for supplying the LA Times with information. So, and Christopher Hitchens, one who's was, Hitchens is not my favorite guy. Totally gave up on him. I wrote him off after he came out in support of. He became basically a hawk and a
He
neocon.
made Winnie the Pooh. Why are you hating?
Well, that was one reason. That's one reason why I hate him. But I mean, he also came out in favor of the Bush administration and the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Okay, so I have nothing to do anymore whatsoever with Christopher Hitchens. But he was definitely right on one thing, and he said the Watergate is history's greatest story being corroborated by a single uncorroborated secret leak. When you do journalism and investigative journalism, and especially with something that's highly explosive, like the Deep Throat leaks were, you need corroboration. And Nixon and his supporters are by no means in the wrong when they said that the Washington Post waived journalistic protocol in publishing these stories that Woodward and Bernstein built their careers out of, because they were totally unsubstantiated. Journalistically, they really don't rise above the level of what would be the equivalent to the legal principle of hearsay. Hearsay can be factually accurate, but it is not legally admissible.
But it had to have some truth to it because it pushed Nixon to resign, right?
It doesn't. I just said hearsay can be truthful, but it's not admissible, meaning a court cannot consider it because it does not meet the legal definitions of credible, reliable evidence. And that's the. And so I said, I can tell you a whole bunch of things. Let's say about, I know one of our old favorites, underground UFO bases manned by reptile people in Arizona, right? I could tell you a bunch of stuff about it that's really true because I was.
Fuck Watergate. That's awesome. I got to hear
Oh yeah,
more.
well yeah, that's for Halloween, okay? And we could I could tell you a whole bunch of stuff about all those underground UFO bases that turn out to be 100% accurate. But who's going to believe me if all I've got is me talking to you
I will believe the shit out of you. Tell you that much.
on laptop, right? I mean, it's not, it's hearsay, it's rumor, it's innuendo, it's gossip, right? And that's why, and everyone, whenever a Nixon supporter or Republican says, well, Washington Post couldn't be believed, pardon me, because Washington Post could not be relied upon. You would say, well, yeah, naturally you'd say that because you're guilty anyway, right? If the more you deny, the more you prove you're guilty. But
I get a lot of crap for defending Nixon. It's not that I defend, like, I don't think he should have stayed being president. I just think if you look, like, obviously there's a lot more going on than just Nixon being the bad egg there. There's a whole bunch of agency problems, and nobody wants to talk about that. It's like someone had mentioned on your episode, but I always hold comments for review. But they were like, there wasn't a person that didn't like Kennedy. I was like, well, that's not fucking true because the man's dead. He got assassinated. So obviously someone didn't like him, but you really have to look at it from, like, obviously people got their own, either whether they're liberal, conservative, whatever, they want to put their own thing into it. But there's never just, nobody's ever all good or all bad. Even like with Hoover, there was some things that he did that were good, and I don't like the man, but there's just a lot of stuff that you start looking at, and Watergate's the one that's synonymous with Nixon, where I'm like, it's never just one guy. He had something in, he either knew what the political climate was amongst all the agencies and everything. There was a reason for him only being the only one you get to hear about.
yeah, and the other thing too is that, and I don't know if it's an American thing, I think they tend to do it less in Europe, where having a history that's several thousand years older than ours, at least in terms of like Caucasian North Americans, not indigenous North Americans, but the descendants of the settlers. Our country is only like 400 or 500 years old max, right? And that's
Three or four people ago.
right, and that's like, yeah, like an afternoon stroll in the park for the Europeans and the Chinese, of course. They tend not to personalize or moralize political scandals and corruption so much. They see it as a necessary evil to achieve, insofar as they try to rationalize it at all. They tend to see it as a necessary evil to achieve the greater good of political stability and, of course, successful imperialism. Because, of course, the history of Western Europe, especially ever since about, well, the beginning of the Crusades, really, in the 11th century, has been intertwined with colonialist and territorial expansion in one form or another.
We got to go back to Mark Felt. How did Felt get in contact with Woodward?
Well, that's dodgy. Again, it's not really clear from either Woodward's account or what Felt said or what's been written about what Felt said. Much of it is very critical about how he actually made contact with Woodward. Now, what we do know about Woodward is the fact that he was a member of the U.S. Navy and probably a member of ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence. And that means that during his sojourn in the armed forces, he would have developed a number of contacts within the law and maintained contacts with the larger intelligence community, and including, and this is, and I'm not, changing the topic, but I'm going to maybe approach this in a little bit a slightly different way, because I think it's one of the most important things about both Watergate and JFK and many of the political fiascos of the 1960s and 70s and back in the 50s that we don't pay enough attention to. It's the size and scope and intensity and level of penetration and infiltration of domestic counterintelligence operations. You just took a hit.
No, when he said penetration and you're talking about that, I was like, that's how Deep Throat got his name, which was the porn thing.
Yeah, right. Well, okay. So I mean, I thought that was just so sub-adolescent. No one would stoop so low as to pick that one up, but I'm wrong again. So yeah, so it's the domestic
Sorry.
intelligence operation thing. What? See, let's just change course a little bit and let's go back to JFK just for 1 second, okay? Everyone knows today that there is, although the exact circumstances of the assassination are still being debated about, what no one really debates seriously is that there was a cover-up commencing on November 2nd, immediately after JFK's death. But what people don't understand when you say that, and they write you off immediately, basically they see an invisible red hat on your head and they simply say you're a maniac, you got nothing to say, get the hell out, right? Conspiracy theorist, right? Or that's just an even uglier way of saying Trump supporter. But because now notice how the discourse is flipped. I think we were talking about that before. When you were conspiracy theorist in the 70s and 80s, you were on the left. When you were a conspiracy theorist in the 2000s, you're on the right.
I heard all that, but you didn't say that you didn't support Trump. I heard Trump supporter, and you said you didn't clarify it with saying that you're not a Trump supporter.
Well, I'm completely neutral. I mean, let me this way. Let me this way. I'll tell you what. This is my view on Donald Trump. Okay, he's not the Antichrist.
His skin has gone from orange to normal now.
Well, that's because the demonic presence, the Duca have obviously left him. Okay,
he went from the Dukes of Hazzard car to just the mild Cadillac.
But the cover-up that we do have evidence for concerning JFK is two things. One, a cover-up for what seems to be, unless that in itself is a smokescreen for something else, of an intelligence failure to take the Oswald threat seriously enough. And of course, a whole bunch of errors, accidental and or accidentally on purpose, on the day of Dallas. So a lot of people, like tons of guys in the Secret Services, were running to cover their asses immediately after the hit took place. But more importantly is the huge cover-up of the network of domestic spying operations that the U.S. government was running against its own people. And one of the reasons why this has become clear, a friend of mine, Leo Simpich, has written a very good book about the Mexican embassy episode in the Oswald story, which has been, it's been so muddied and polluted. No one knows anything, the slightest idea.
Nobody knows if he was even there.
Right? No, but I mean that so much of that can be white or black propaganda, right? Coming out, released at different times for different strategic purposes. So the whole thing's an incredible.
I believe he was there only because that only makes sense of why it's so confusing. If you're talking about like an intelligence cover up, then they made it so. I mean, they did a pretty damn good job, but it would just be a simple he wasn't there. If it was that clear cut.
Yeah, and we can like I recommend to people with most things concerning JFK, be agnostic about a lot of the stuff that draws the most flack and discussion. What we do know now, however, is that Mexico City was the site of America's biggest and most important overseas domestic spying operation.
Not just America, though. Not just America.
But it was definitely America's, and it may have been others as well. But they had managed to hack all the cables and all the transmissions and set up an entire electronic spying network on both the Soviet and Cuban embassies and consular offices in Mexico City. And they were using that as one of their primary sources about information about the Caribbean, about Cuba in particular, and about Russian activities in the Western Hemisphere. Now, the problem is that, and getting back to your point, as soon as there was a story about Oswald being in Mexico City, and the Warren Commission had been set up, and at the time they were very concerned about the serious possibility of either a Senate or a House separate inquiry into the assassination, right? All of that would have been blown. All of that could have been uncovered by the investigation, right? So that's one of the reasons they started scrambling, they started shredding stuff, they started running for cover. And then all of these weird stories about Oswald, no, it wasn't Oswald, it was a double, that was on a different day, it was somebody else, it was a bunch of Mexican communist university students out of their minds on peyote who hallucinated all of this. All this stuff started to keep people from looking at not necessarily what Oswald did or did not do, but from all of the stuff in the ad environment that Oswald could have been transversing through at that time. The American spying operations. And a lot of that stuff in Mexico City looped back into the domestic spying operations that the CIA, the FBI, military intelligence, naval intelligence, ONI had going on illegally in places like Miami and New Orleans and Dallas and Houston. And that's what we mean by a cover up. A lot of the stuff that we seem to detect quite legitimately to reflect a conspiratorial intent and a conspiratorial effort to conceal doesn't really pertain directly to the assassination. It pertains directly to the underground and occluded vast domestic intelligence spying operations. And that's why and the other thing we have learned with certainty is that, again, whatever Oswald did or did not do, whoever was running him, or maybe nobody at all, maybe it really was a lone gunman after all. So, like I said, being agnostic, please, if you want to be sane and rational about all of this, is that they definitely knew about him. He was not an unknown.
Well, we know that from all the 201 files that were pulled on
Right,
him.
exactly. So, I mean, that part of it is a lie. See, here's it's the asymmetry of truth, isn't it? We know that they were lying about not knowing Oswald, and therefore you're more likely to conclude or infer from that, probably incorrectly, that by itself proves that he was a government agent, and he was a government agent at the time that he shot Kennedy. I think that's unproven. I can't obviously say it's not true. I can say, though, it's unproven. But what we can prove, directly and indirectly, is that he was clearly swimming in and well known by and intensely familiar with U.S. domestic intelligence operations.
Well, the counterpoint what people usually bring up is like, oh, well, how do you know that he was an intelligence person? And it was like, well, first of all, even if he wasn't an intelligence person, the government had files on him, and people will deny that there's files on him, even though there's documents that say there's a 201 file that they were pulling from him. I don't think they've ever fully released his 201, or we have bits and pieces of a 201. But he went to another country to defect. You're damn right your intelligence agency is going to monitor or have a file on them, whether he's an intelligence asset or not. So the argument to that, there's a lot of lone nutters that bring up different points about that. And it's just like that none of those work because they're going to have a file either way if he is an intelligence agent or if he's not. He went to another country tearing up his U.S. citizenship. Now you're going to be deemed as a threat if you're not an intelligence person. So the lying is that it's not really a question of if there was a conspiracy. The conspiracy's in the cover up. Why did they cover up so much if they're protecting domestic or intelligence operations? Oh, that's one answer. Or they had a part in it, and it's just kind of finding out where that is.
Yeah. Right. Well, obviously, I cannot, and again, we're just using more logic here, logical reasoning. I cannot deny, as a issue matter a priori or self-evidently true logical propositions, that Oswald was not being run by some intelligence operation of some kind. Right? Even a very, very low level one. I mean, it could have been, like I said, my theory is that if there was something like this going on, it would have been very small and very low level. It would have been something like George Milton Schult taking orders from David Atlee Phillips to, make Oswald do something nutty. And then all the counterintelligence, white ops and black ops were in place to blame it on the Cubans or the Russians. Right? that would not have been a vast conspiracy. It would not have taken a lot of people, and it could have been done very, very simply. And of course, the other thing too is, remember, and the defector issue about Oswald, it is a truism in intelligence work that a defector and then a return defector, in terms of intelligence asset, is even more valuable than a double agent, because you can use him as a cutout. You can use his identity, even just his name. You can get a passport issued to somebody that's got all of Oswald's details on it, because the State Department knows all about it, and run all kinds of stuff using that person.
We're gonna have to get back to Deep Throat at some point, but do you
Sure.
think he
Yeah, but
was?
I'm really saying, and this is the same thing about Deep Throat, right? Like, a lot of the discourse about the conspiracy, pro and con, what did Nixon do, not do, what did Oswald do, not do, what did JFK do or not do, is really based upon logical extrapolations from bodies of evidence, many of parts of which are losing large chunks from the totality of their bodies. I mean, huge gaps in everything, even with a lot of stuff that's been released and or redacted, right? Is that you're still making inferences the whole time. No one really has a smoking gun, no pun intended, yet,
But
as of
wait,
yet.
with the Nixon stuff, that's well documented, I thought, which was the main narrative out there. But I feel like they only released part of what the story is.
That's right. They've only released part of the story. And remember, our topic is Deep Throat, right? And that's what I was trying to say. And getting back to the Hitchens comment about Watergate was the biggest story that ever ran that did not have a second corroborated source. And again, that's what I was trying to say again. If you're looking at it from an investigative perspective, that's damning. I mean, that's a huge issue. Precisely, apart from the rather legalistic consideration that the story was not properly vetted, because it was objectively not properly vetted. Even if everything in it was true, it was still not properly vetted. Why would a paper, the Washington Post, of all papers in the country at that time, go with a story that big that was incorrectly and insufficiently vetted? Which means it's not proper journalism. Well, what's the answer?
Mockingbird.
Okay, explain Mockingbird, because that's
Op-
part of the answer, I think, if we're talking about the same thing.
yeah, Operation Mockingbird was covert media assets. So you had media people that were in line with the government to be able to post up your stories or whatever your narrative was.
Right, and therefore, what would be the motive?
Uh, I don't know. So people have a final conclusion. The media is kind of like the mouth to everybody.
Washington Post, on the left or on the right?
Fuck if I know. They all suck, to be honest with you.
True. Okay, let me put it this way: liberal or conservative?
Ooh, I don't know. No, the New York Times is more liberal, so I would say conservative on the Washington Post.
Okay, let me put it this way: pro Nixon or pro Kennedy?
Ooh, pro Nixon.
Oh, pro Kennedy.
Just,
Heather Graham and all those people.
I never read the Washington Post. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Don't bother, okay? But the thing about the Washington Post too is you have to remember all those neocons that were talking heads back in 1991 and then again in 2003. Remember those guys like Wolfowitz and Cheney and everybody? Yeah, all the ones who are still living. Who are they all working for? CNN, Washington Times, New York Post, Washington Post, New York Times.
The newspapers
Definitely not the Washington Times. Okay.
Newspapers I don't read: Washington Post, New York Times, New York Post. Any of them with a post or Washington. Even the Rolling Stone fucking sucks. They used to be good, and they all just went down shit.
Okay, so but I agree with you, and so
L.A. Times, for instance, I don't know what's up with them. I come across documents in the Kennedy relating stuff, and they're posting articles from conspiracy people about there's a conspiracy with Kennedy. So I'm like, I don't think they were in the pocket of Mockingbird, because the plenty of CIA files on them, but also I don't read their stuff either.
I kind of lost my train of thought there for a second, but that's okay. Keep on going.
No, LA Times is one that I don't know if that was in Mockingbird or not, because they had posted a lot of conspiracy writings in their work that the CIA had even documented. Like the LA Times had said this, but there's from documents that I do know who was, I guess, in cahoots, is the lunch meetings that I can tell with a bunch of Time editors and a bunch of other things that have been well documented that they are part of the Operation Mockingbird thing about pitching stories. But somehow they still let stories seep through that might be more conspiratorial, where I wonder if that's just an independent journalist or if that's just an actual like ploy of like, see, they don't just post good articles about us; they post some bad ones too.
Well, everyone's heard of black ops and black propaganda. Do you know what white ops are or white propaganda?
I don't know what white ops are, but is white propaganda propaganda against white people?
No,
Oh, well,
no, that's just that's called critical race theory. Okay, that's different. That's CRT stuff, and we're not going there. Okay,
okay.
because I never get out here alive. But the thing is that white ops or white propaganda are basically bundles of information which are essentially true, but they're released strategically to create a particular outcome. Now, you just said that in your opinion, the LA Times may be outside of the post Mockingbird loop because they publish a lot of stuff that would be embarrassing to the establishment or are critical of the LA Times in some way.
They were probably
So
more left.
okay, but notice what it's doing. They run stories like that. So you say, well, maybe these guys are okay. Maybe somebody in there is getting good stuff out, and somehow it's it's slipping the editorial review process, and probably all the AI they got set up, and the machine learning to detect all the
Well, this is
suspicious
back in the
sentence.
'60s, not
Well,
now.
whatever. But I mean, going even up today, right? All this stuff's getting out. And so therefore, but if you are hypothetically running a white propaganda operation, what are you doing? You're looking, well, we're not the Washington Post and we're not the New York Times, and we can prove that we're not been affiliated by the CIA. We've been penetrated and incorporated by the CIA because we're running critical stories about the establishment.
Yeah, that's what I said
So you've
about
got
them
to
posting.
double trust us, right?
Yeah,
I,
that's
I
what I'm
mean, I'm not
saying.
saying that's true. I'm merely saying is you can by no means exclude that simply because the possibility of running a white op and a black op by the same outfit is totally possible.
But I mean, from what I've read,
Especially and that's one of the things why America is such a cornucopia for domestic intelligence operations. It's such a pluralistic society.
do you think
You
with
can run both ends against the middle nonstop.
Do you think with the Nixon and Watergate fiasco, do you think that the reason why the public's mind and the history books are all talking about Nixon is because a lot of these propaganda tactics, or not propaganda, but all these black ops or white ops operations were in play to be able to just point him as the main focus? It seems like every headline, whenever you type in Watergate, you can look at old newspaper magazines, everyone headline is Nixon. And it's not like, maybe it might be the slow trickle of information or the one-sided information that points it to Nixon where all these reporters are running with. But I feel like this also boosted and ingrained it into the public's mind that Nixon is the Watergate whole thing is all Nixon. And we can look at documentation from like the church committee and others that there's a lot more than just Nixon going on. I mean, the church committee, in my opinion, is a bit of a whitewash, even though they did a lot of good stuff. They just never posted the CIA's budget. They never went into really giving any damages to the CIA besides like an article that said that their reputation would never recover. And it seems like they're doing fine now. So it's like, I don't know what the whole, but reading that church committee thing is a giant leveler for a lot of things. Now, I'm not a leftist and I'm not on the right either. I believe deep state. But when you start looking at like CIA on college campuses, that's still happening today. I mean, those are real ethical concerns that have not been adjusted to and been fixed. So to say that this was a Watergate issue or to say that this is BS.
Yeah. I think a good way of thinking about, okay, we're talking about Watergate and
We're all
the
fucked. That's the good way.
Watergate legacy on the meta level. Jean Baudrillard was a great one of the. He had nothing to do with postmodernism, but everybody thinks he's one of the architects of postmodernism. It's a long story, but anyway,
Oh yeah, I know him. That guy is into postmodernism.
that's right. That postmodernist guy who wasn't a postmodernist, Jean Paul. It's funny. Everyone disavowed themselves having anything to do with it, and yet they have been posthumously nailed to the side of the thing. It's like Ahab chasing Moby Dick there through the abyss forever. Um, he made a really good comment about Watergate because it was his theory of the alibi. And basically, and it's a little bit of a play on Guy Debord's earlier theories about the society of the spectacle. And he says an alibi is when you run a story out in public, you shove it out there, you stuff it in everybody's face so they can't possibly not be aware of it.
Like a
Like
turkey on
remember,
Thanksgiving.
yeah, and remember, and Watergate. Remember what was going on? I mean, I was growing up at the time. Everything you were talking about was Watergate. One of the two towers, like after 9/11. I was telling my cousin because I wasn't in the United States at the time. I was in Australia. And I says, "How it's going over there?" It's like 6 months after, right? And he says, "For the past year, we have been talking about nothing else." Right. Okay. So, and that's what you call an alibi, not because Two Towers didn't happen. Nothing. I'm not talking about the Two Towers. I'm not in that Two Towers denial. Okay. But it's you use something that seems to prove the exact overwhelming proof of the thing that's the exact opposite of the truth. And what Baudrillard said about Watergate is it's an alibi. In other words, they brought Nixon to the point of impeachment, forcing him out to prove that the system worked. But by proving the system worked, look at Nixon. What about that? We got him. What are you saying? What are you ignoring at the moment that you do that? All the guys who should have been nailed too, but walked. Right? That's the alibi. We make this huge deal about Nixon, and by killing the monster Nixon, we've proven that we are monster killers. Therefore, if we are monster killers, there can't be any monsters because we just killed one. See how great we are at killing monsters? What about all the other monsters who don't get killed? Well,
That's
that's because they're not monsters, or that's conspiracy theory, or you're paranoid. We got Nixon. But let's break it down to real basic level stuff. If the system was fundamentally corrupt, Nixon never would have been forced to resign because he would have been part of the corruption. We would have been part of it too. But how can we be part of the corruption if we got rid of him? That proves that we're not corrupt.
it's like that's like some legal speak or some shit like that that gets you confused, where you just go, okay, and then you walk away and try and contemplate what your life is while your wife sells your futon on the yard sale.
Right. You didn't see that one coming. So that's what he said. He said Watergate. I mean, it happens in Italy all the time. I was talking to my friend Guido Preparato. I was on another podcast with somebody else, and we were talking about the
Cheating
Maxi
on me?
trials. Sorry, what?
You cheating on me?
No. It wasn't his podcast. It was somebody else's podcast, but Guido was a guest. He
Yeah,
was
but you're
talking about
doing
my
other
new book.
podcasts. I thought you
At the
were.
end of this podcast, I'm going to do a plug for my new book, okay? Because Guido just loves it. He says I sent him the MS, and he said I can't put it down. And I said, yeah, well, that's because of the glue and the binding. But anyway, I was chatting with him in another podcast, and we were talking about the Maxi trials in Palermo in Sicily, right? And they got 400 mafiosi in these cages. Remember that? These huge cages, literally cages in the courtroom. They were all caged up, and they were all screaming and shouting and yelling obscenities and throwing cigarette boxes at each other and crap like that. And this was like the Sicilian state is finally being serious about the mafia. Look, you can't claim falsely that we're not concerned and taking law and order seriously. Right? It's hard to argue with if it's just the spectacle. But what's the story behind the spectacle? Mafia in Sicily is not out of business. It's doing fine.
There's a lot of that bread and circus stuff. Like, for some reason, the public just feels justified when someone's behind bars or when it's something like this, as long as it's on screen. Like, I noticed this when they do they bring like they talk about do a news story about soldiers coming home, for instance, and they'll have like for the ones that didn't make it home, and then they'll have someone folding up a flag and handing it to a family member while the lady's crying. And I go, they had to set that shot. It's a low angle. The guy is bent down like this, taking the shot. So once you start seeing that, you start going, why do we need that as a public? And I feel like it's just because of all the psychological stuff that's been going on for all these years when it comes to psyops and all these types of things. And when I say that, it's just because there's been a lot of confusion and there's never been answers. For instance, an example you mentioned, 9/11. There's something going on there. And I don't mean that the towers didn't fall. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that I've read the 983-page commission report, and the fact that there was so there's a closed door testimony or whatever they did. You can't, there's so many questions there. Why did you try and get rid of the scrap metal a week later? There's a lot of stuff where it's like family members that are crying and upset that there's documentation still locked. And then you get called a conspiracy theorist for that. And I go, we should not be at this point. That's reasonable skepticism to have of like, what the fuck was going on?
Okay. Now on that, when I was having my chat with Guido on the other podcast,
Stop mentioning the other podcast.
My secret relationship.
What's their name,
okay.
at least?
No, it's the Lovers of Eric. Okay, so when I was having my podcast with the Lovers of Eric, and I was talking to Guido as one of my lovers, of Eric, right? That's all. It's platonic. He was in Italy, and I'm here in Canada. Okay, so it's nothing. It's fine.
So we
But
are getting back to Deep Throat. All
we
right.
are getting back to Deep Throat stuff. That's right. From here on, Deep Throat 1, 2, and then Son of Deep Throat. But okay, the and then the dog of Deep Throat. But uh, the point is, Robbie, is
Damn
that
it.
during our talk about the Maxi trials in Sicily, not only is the mafia absolutely thriving in Sicily like it always has, for a number of really reasons that are really anthropological and sociological, right? Because it's a clientele society, and a clientele social structure is requires criminal middlemen to make it run. I mean, that's how a clientele society works, all by unofficial channels and back channels. It's an anthropological fact. It has nothing to do with morality, but this is the point. Guido says, okay, so there's this huge spectacle, the Maxi trials, you get 400 Sicilian mafiosi locked up like animals in a cage for like weeks on end, and they're photographed and they're 24/7. It's like a C-SPAN. It's Sicilian version of C-SPAN when it was running until all the judges got assassinated. But I mean, it
Wait,
was running, right?
what?
Falcone got blown up, and someone else got blown up a couple of weeks after him, and that's sort of when it petered out. But
Coincidence?
no, but
Hmm.
no, that we do really know about. But the point is, he said, but no one believed it. And so that's what he was pressing me on. He says, they do these spectacles and it convinces nobody. So why do we keep on doing the spectacles? Right. And of course, we had a different chat about that. But then it just reinforced something that I've been aware of for a very, very long time. And other people are aware of it too. And they called my attention to it. And I thought about it. And at first, I kind of resisted it. And then I began thinking about it more. And I say, no, I think there's something to the theory. And it's really, it's cultural relativism. It's the fact that if you're a certain type of society, with a certain type of history, you're going to be the public consciousness is going to be a bit more collectively predisposed to a kind of a cynicism. I mean, France is a classic example of that, right? I mean, you almost cannot scandalize the French when, when it's almost impossible when it comes to political crises and outrages, right? Especially of a neurotic or sexual kind. I mean, the French thought, I can tell you this firsthand because I was in Europe at the time it was happening. The French thought that nothing proved the insanity. I mean, the Neanderthalic stupidity of Americans more than the Clarence Thomas fiasco.
Not familiar with that one.
Oh, Clarence Thomas, when Anita Hill claimed that he shouldn't be appointed to the Supreme Court because he was engaging in sexual harassment of her in the office. And also Bill Clinton as well. They're actually going to impeach a first-rate president. They thought that Bill Clinton was a first-rate president of the United States because he had an affair with one of his interns. C'est incroyable. I mean, it's just not possible. Okay.
Yeah, well, the French think about sex a lot differently than we do over here.
Well, that's part of the problem, isn't it? And apart from whatever we think or about sex or not, American culture with its own history, which means it's no better or no worse than the French one, just different. Uh, if you apply the general rubric of cultural relativism and historical contextualism, is essentially a moralistic society. I mean, Americans are hideously hypocritical as a group because on the outside, we're sort of neo-puritanical, and I draw no difference between the left and right on this regard. The left is as puritanical in its own way as the right is, meaning a desire for purity, a desire for conformity, a desire for agreement. And if you really want to get cheap and nasty about it, this is where identity politics and virtue signaling and emojis and likes and cancel culture and all that stuff kind of feeds into, but it both flows from it and feeds back into it. Is that in America, which is also this is culture that produced the Western, one of the two or three truly archetypal cinematic forms, right, is about finding and killing the bad guy. Well, if your problems are systemic and structural, killing a bad guy is not unimportant. Like you just said at the beginning of the podcast, rightfully so. Nixon really shouldn't have been president, right? I'll agree with you. I'll agree with that. I'll concede that. Again, it's the same thing. I don't think he was the Antichrist itself. And I think what he did with détente was although Kissinger was co-pilot of that one, was a really, really neat piece of diplomatic.
Are you saying Westerns were programming us this whole time?
Well, it's both, Robbie. It's both cause and effect. It's not an accident. The American culture. I mean, by American culture, I mean white, middle class, westward moving settler culture developed the Western as a
There's no
cultural
such thing as a
genre.
middle class anymore. It's gone.
Okay, what used to be the American bourgeois and petty bourgeois and lumpen proletariat moving out west created this thing that they called the Western. Okay.
Hmm.
And one of the and it became a universal form because it's a type of artistic form that is easily exportable because it is both puritanical and narratively simple, but intensely dramatic and exciting, right? So it's both pleasure and persuasiveness. And what it is, it's about the killing the bad guy. And when you kill the bad guy, civilization will flourish, right?
What about
Shane.
saving the damsel in distress?
Well, that's part of it too. That's a byproduct of killing the bad guy, but that's not specifically unique to the Western, right? I mean, you can have lots of damsel in distress stuff, and you don't necessarily kill the bad guy. Uh, that's sort of like a byproduct. But the funny thing about the Western is that when you look at most Westerns, not all of them, but most Westerns, they tend to be somewhat asexual. They tend to be almost anti-romantic things. Women do not figure highly or prominently in most Westerns, other than, and this is the point, as symbols of civilization and culture. Like they're sort of symbolic of the femininity or the feminization process that the hero will succumb to and undergo after he successfully kills the bad guy.
In particular, Clint Eastwood
Sorry?
movies, yes.
I'm not saying there are exceptions, but one of the things that makes the deviant Western deviant is precisely the fact that they're attacking the icons of the genre, right? The Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns, which are some of my favorite films of all time, are totally cynical parodies of the Western because he sort of goes for the throat. He goes for the jugular, right? And he pulls it out and says, what the Western is all about death. So let's do a Western with mega death in it. Right? So, but that gets us back to killing the bad guy. But the thing about the Western is because it's a mythology about settlement and the creation of civilization out of wilderness. It's really Genesis, right? It's a secular American-based version of the book of Genesis, the beginning of things, right? You narratively translate that impersonal historical experience into the intensely personal and highly subjective confrontation between enemies, one of which is morally right and one of which is morally wrong. And when the one who is morally wrong goes down, morally right prevails, and civilization continues the way it's supposed to.
Well, that's
Or
been
as
the
Hillary.
long archetype of history of good and evil in every single literature, basically.
Yeah, but different cultures handle good and evil very differently. Like, for example, you don't get this sort of thing in Chinese history because Chinese political philosophy is based upon seasonal cycles of recurrence. Remember, civil empires rise, they thrive, then they fall. What happens when the empire falls? You get a new empire. And over again, right? It's cyclical history. American history is linear because it's more biblical in its imaginary. Not necessarily that all Americans are religious. They're not. Many Americans are secular. Probably the majority now are clearly secular, but they still operate within a cultural ambit that relies a great deal upon the religious imaginary. I mean, when Hillary Clinton says with a straight face, "Get on the right side of history," that's like Saint Augustine, right?
What's wrong with
And you
Hillary
kind of
Clinton?
yeah, and you kind of
She's hot.
come out. Sorry.
What's wrong with Hillary Clinton? She's hot
Yeah. Anyway,
in a in
um,
a in a mean school teacher way. I was upset with her over one thing, which was that she did not go postal on Bill's ass after that shit happened. I wanted to see some clothes being thrown out on the lawn and shit.
okay. All I'm going to say about that is when I lived in Britain, the most unsettling thing that ever happened to me was finding out how many Englishmen really thought Margaret Thatcher was hot.
I thought Margaret Thatcher's hot.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go.
I
Proves
honestly
my
have never
point.
seen her before.
Well, I'm going to talk about this in my other podcast, and there was this guy at my other podcast who was going about how hot Margaret Thatcher was, and I said, it's like my dark days back in Britain.
What does
I
she
mean,
look
hanging
like?
around the pubs, listening to all these English guys who thought that really getting it on because Margaret Thatcher was like really hot. But anyway, uh, what was I talking about?
I gotta
Yeah, the
find
right
out what
side, the right
Margaret's.
side
Hold
of
on.
history, the right side of history. If you come, here's the thing. Think about it. Deconstruct it for a second, okay? I mean, don't go all postmodernist on me. Let's just deconstruct this for a
Oh,
second. Yeah, I
oh,
know. Yeah, no.
oh, oh,
Someone called her once.
oh.
It was a female journalist. He called her a slimy codfish.
She's got the Nancy Grace haircut that I
Oh
can't
yeah,
stand.
no. Look, I don't want to go into it. Okay.
Marijuana,
I'm trying to make my marriage
cigarettes.
work. I'm trying to make my marriage work. Okay, at home, and I don't want to go. I want to go down these channels. But
The
the
definition
the
of a key lime pie or snickerdoodle is what that looked like.
I don't like snickerdoodles. I like key lime pie, but they have to be like really well made because if you don't do it right, it tastes like peppermint toothpaste.
Tastes like a fucking sock with butter in it.
Well, yeah, something like that. Anyway, but when you come out and you say let's but deconstruct it without getting all postmodernist on my ass about it, when you say get on the right side of history, in order for you to be able to say that and sound like you mean it, and I think she means it because like most politicians that fail in the end, they start believing their own bullshit, like Nixon did, I think, at the end. And Trump, who knows, but when she said get on the right side of history, what is it in order for you to say that, do you have to presuppose? What kind of set of assumptions, most of which will probably be unconscious because they're culturally determined, needs to be floating around in the soggy neuro unconscious we all have to come out and say something like that? What's required? What kind of moves do you have to make? So give me, it's not a rhetorical question.
I know. I'm just waiting for you to give me the answer.
No, I'm not going to give you the answer. You work it out.
Look, this is how I live my
You
life.
you
People
and
give me
both
the
your
answer.
viewers. You work it out.
I would think that if she's talking, I see. I don't know because I don't think she understands really what to do. I think she's really good at taking orders. So I always feel like whenever she spoke, she was getting orders from somebody.
Whoever came up with it, whether it's her or not, even if she was plagiarizing, what do you have to assume to say out loud a sentence like that? Get on the right side of history.
She's probably on the right. I don't know. Western
No.
ideology still.
How about this? What you have to do, there's several things you have to do, and I'm not going to talk about them in descending order. These are just, they're bundled together as a package. But one of the most
Good
outstanding
old
things you're
two for
doing,
one. Good old
yeah.
two.
Well, we are talking about deep throat, right? So you have to implicitly hypothesize a moral understanding of history, or rather, that history is a moral phenomena, right? That is a really good way of understanding the Western monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And of course, each one of those is broken down into dozens and dozens of fragments and subgroupings, right? But one of the things that the Occidental monotheistic world, well, a lot of which came from the East actually, but the Occidental monotheistic worldview does is that unlike the pagan Greek and Roman and Egyptian Syrian traditions that it was reacting against, is that it takes natural phenomena and invests it with moral significance, right? How do we know that the world is fallen, has been alienated from God? How do we know? There's too much lousy shit in it. Disease, death, suicide, suffering. These things are morally bad. Therefore, the universe has been contaminated because a good God, the source of nature, out of his goodness would flow a good nature, a universe with a positive moral charge to it, right? But we don't see that, or we see a great deal of something else. Now think about it. So you use death and suffering and disease and famine and earthquake and crappy submersibles that implode 4,000 feet under the water when
That's
they're not
so
supposed
sad.
to.
Don't even say that. That's so
Yeah,
sad.
well, yeah, but that somebody, I'm a lawyer. I tell my first year students, we're going to play, I say, for the next 3 years, people, we're going to play nonstop mind games with you. Okay, we're going to get our fingers into your brain and start rearranging things. So you might as well start now learning it today with me. Okay, when you go home tonight and turn on the TV or go online and bring up the news and you hear about the little submersible that got crushed when it was violating a maritime graveyard like the Titanic, or a plane that blows up in midair, or another bus or ferry in Indonesia that sinks, or a bus in India that goes off the cliff, or a fertilizer plant in Africa that blows up. The first thing that's going to go through your mind is damages. Who's going to pay, and how much, and how are we going to get it, right?
That's not even what I'm thinking. I just feel bad because there was a 19-year-old kid on there, and I have to think they put out an article that said that when the sub crushed, it happened so fast and it exploded with like the heat of the sun. And I go, that's a great way for people to stop feeling bad that these people might have just been slowly cracking and breaking under all this pressure in a sub.
Well, what was worse would that be is that they were actually stuck down um, in the vicinity of the Titanic and not had lost power or had lost mobility and were basically slowly suffocating.
Jesus, it's gonna make me cry.
Because that would have been tantamount to being buried alive.
I know they weren't
Okay.
supposed to be there. I'm not saying that.
No,
I'm
no,
just
it's
it's a loss
not.
to human
It
life.
is that whole setup. It was garbage when you look at it from top to bottom. It was complete garbage, and that they shouldn't have been doing it, and they shouldn't have been there. And any parent should not take their kid into something like that, no matter how badly the kid wants to go. Parents shouldn't even want to go in the first place. But anyway, I'm not passing judgment, okay? But I mean, here's the thing: if you see the universe in moral terms, you're going to see history in moral terms. And so when you and go back to your question, which seems like 50 years ago when you asked it, which is like, why Nixon? Nixon, 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 Nixon.
Because he was morally
It
bad.
he is morally bad, but so are like thousands, tens of thousands of other people in
Mhm.
Washington. And this is the guy we're focused on now. Partially it's media, partially it's spectacle. But I think and all that's true, and I'm not going to deny any of it. And I've done a lot of work on it, but it goes even deeper than that, and it goes right down toward the kind of the cultural bedrock of the society. It's what the French call the la mentalité, the collective consciousness of the culture of the society, provided there is one, or at least the collective consciousness of certain hegemonic groups within the broader society. Because as we know, Native Americans and African Americans experienced World War II, let's say, for as an example, quite differently than, let's say, Caucasian Americans did. I mean, Chester Himes, a guy I want to come, I'm got a book on him coming out. It's on the back burner at the moment, but I've got been working on a major study of Chester Himes and his Harlem Crime
What you got
novel
over there?
series.
What you got over there?
What?
Huh?
Where?
You said you got something on the back burner. What you got
Yeah,
cooking?
yeah. No, that's a cat. And uh, yeah, you know what his cat's called? Son of Deep Throat. And he says, and he's in his autobiography, most of his early novels are generally autobiographical, and he simply said, nobody in Watts was really that upset about Pearl Harbor, right? So when you say things like the cultural collective unconscious, you always have to be careful about which group you're actually talking about, right? But I think in terms of the European, Anglo-American middle class, or what used to be middle class, Caucasian elements, social groupings within the national network of cultures. A moralistic view of history is kind of sine qua non. I mean, without that, not.
Can I can I ask you
This is the way we have to see things.
a moral question? Not a moral question, but a perspective question of a right way of thinking about things. If you say no, it'll be a shorter question.
No, I'm not going to say no to that. I would say
I'm
I'll
tackling
put it to you this way. Okay, I'll put it to you this way. I think that my morality, or let me put it this way, it is difficult to live in the world for a very long period of time without filtering what your senses are feeding into you, into your neural centers, without a moralizing component to it. And by my moralizing, I mean understanding it in moral terms. Does this conform or violate the principles by which we live more as moral beings, or self-proclaimed moral beings, right?
Then let me
You know,
ask.
is that good? Is that morally right, or is it morally wrong?
Then
And I
leave the morals
think,
at the door. Leave the
sorry,
morals
yeah.
at the leave the morals at
Well,
the door. This
I'm
will
not. You see, but you see, that's an artificial. You can't really do that, because you can't leave the morals at the door, because it's kind of like Kant, right? Our moral categories are directly embedded within our brains, which is one way that we
All right,
filter the
this is a lot
information.
for this question, but hold on. I want your opinion on this, and I think this is a healthy way to think about things. And it puts people in, I wouldn't say it does put people in a moral kind of conundrum a little bit when there's certain subjects to this. I get called a conspiracy theorist, which I don't think I am. I entertain some of them, sure. I like to have fun with some of them, but I try and think of things more logically and more kind of critically on this, which makes a lot of people that would say like conspiracy theory, once they get to know me, they go, okay, it's not really a conspiracy theorist. That's a healthy sense of skepticism right there. But when it comes to like, I always bring up the example of like Charles Manson, and people go, "Oh my God, how are you going to defend Charles Manson?" First of all, I think Charles Manson was nuts. I've seen interviews with him, but you don't go to jail for being nuts. There's a lot more going on there, and perjury in his court case that Vincent Pelosi do is a huge problem. So I kind of bring up these moral questions where I go, if you're already going, "Oh, this is what I see of him," put him away. It's like, well, that's what you want. What is the truth? Just because you want this outcome, is it done the right way? And I do believe it being right. Like, I believe the American public should know about a lot of things. I forgot you mentioned something else, but you started going into this long answer to a yes or no on my question. So I forgot what it was. It might come back to me. It might not.
What's my morality, or what's my take on morality? And I would say that my take on morality, it's Schopenhauer kind of articulated for the first time, and then Wittgenstein picked up on it, because Schopenhauer was probably the decisive influence on what we call the young Wittgenstein, up to the time of the guy who wrote the Tractatus. And then after that, he kind of became his own thing and started spinning a lot. But basically, it's
Like in circles
Wittgenstein,
or
well, spinning his wheels a lot,
oh,
while also going in circles. And by the way, have you seen The Flash yet?
it's really good.
What
There
I
were a
liked was,
couple moments
I
where I was like, what the fuck am I watching?
look, the part I liked was the birth of the multiverse at the end, okay, during the time travel arena,
I
that
like
arena
Michael
thing.
Keaton's
That actually, I
explanation.
I thought that's the one. If anything saves this film, it's going to be that, okay. I like that bit, and the way that Adam West just popped out of nowhere, the
Yeah.
1966 Batman, I
I
love
will
that. I
I
mean,
will
that,
say
that
during
made
that
it worthwhile.
I
That made it worth my $35, because it was my turn to pay, okay. That
$35.
made that. Well, my wife
Okay.
was with me.
Well, I was saying Adam West is my Batman, but Michael Keaton, I think I had moved him up there. But then once I was like, I think Michael Keaton might be my new favorite. And then I was like, wait a minute, is he going to keep dying over and fucking over again? And I was like, Jesus. And I just walked out of the movie.
Here's my take. Okay, I got stuck with all the verbal footnoting, okay,
It's
but
fun. I like it.
yeah, well, yeah, okay, sure. I mean,
My
you're paying
show,
me for this, so I don't
my
really care
show
what
is
I do.
conversation, first of
Yeah,
all.
okay. Here, I'll tell you the thing. The Tim Burton Batman, I feel, and this actually is relevant to conspiracy theory a little bit. I think we had a conversation once about Stone's JFK, and I said the thing that gets me about JFK, I agree with what James Elroy, the guy who's the subject of the book. Thing is that with the Tim Burton Batman. In other words, Stone put all this effort to make a really shitty movie about the Kennedy assassination, when what he should have done is taken all that talent, all that drive, all that energy, which is all there, and made a film adaptation of the Don DeLillo novel Libra, which I think is the greatest thing done on the Kennedy assassination and on Oswald of all time. And Dean Minogue agrees with me. He said once he read it, he said, I knew I could never write about that. I was planning a book about the Kennedy assassination. He said I couldn't do it. He said there's no way I'm going to mess with this. This is a work of art, and
What
I'm not going to touch it. So he came up with Underworld USA instead, which is sort of his variation of a theme rather than a direct challenge to DeLillo's book. But the point is that when I was watching Batman back in 1989, the Tim Burton Batman, I said, walked out and I said, what they should have done is taken everything in that movie that was good, and there's a lot of good in it, and they should have done an adaptation of the Englehart Marsh Rogers run in Detective Comics in 1977. Do you remember that one? It's sort of like a
I'm
month
in
in the
my
year of
20s.
Batman.
No.
Yeah, but you can still go on Google it online, okay? Because it's like a month in life of Batman. Hugo Strange comes back after 40 years. He disappears in 1930. The year is 1977. He's been gone for 37 years, and he comes back. Okay, Penguin's in it. Joker's in it. He sort of gets back to Catwoman at the very end of it, and there's a bunch of stuff in between, like Deadshot and Clayface and all those other people running around and doing crap. Okay, and I said that's what he should have done. It had mad scientists, it had monsters, it had zombies. That's when the Joker was doing his Joker fish thing, right? He was turning all the fish in the world to look like the Joker, so he could claim copyright violation and therefore royalties, right? That, that's what it was. I said that's the Batman movie Tim Burton should have made, right? You could have had Nicholson and DeVito in the same movie at the same time, playing their respective characters. Like DeVito is the Joker and Nicholson is the Penguin, right? And
No,
that
no,
would have
no,
worked
no,
beautifully.
no, no. DeVito is the Penguin, and
Yeah,
Nicholson
I
is
know,
the
I know that, Rob, but I was just trying to I was trying to be funny here for a change. Okay, so that's what they should have done. So that's what I feel about Stone. But what was I saying? Yeah, okay. But the thing about the Flash is the one thing that saved it was the birth of the multiverse at the end. I thought, okay, it was worth my $35, because I was paying. That's what made it worthwhile. But going back to morality, my view of morality is Wittgenstein's version of what Schopenhauer was learning from Schopenhauer at the time. And it's known today as language game theory or language game theory. And what it is it's a radical phenomenal contextualism, which is that it is possible. I mean, he's talking about logical and philosophical verification of moral hypotheses. He says it is possible to come up with an objectively morally right or morally wrong statement in any given situation, depending upon what the rules of moral language are. Right?
You know who's exempt from that rule?
Uh, Tell me.
People that choose not to talk.
That's right. But they still think. Cats, that's why cats are so exempt from it.
Wait, you can get hurt for thinking?
Today you
Sometimes I
can, yes.
do.
Today you can't. Today you can, yes, because uh, what everyone is doing, because basically everyone in America is assembling themselves into an army on two
Well,
different
we're
sides.
really individualized tribes and groups right now, which is nuts to me, is because, like, I don't care if you want to be gay. I don't care if you want to be any of that type of stuff. It doesn't bother me or affect my life, does it? No, it doesn't. It's people are like upset that other people are doing things that they feel like is going to impede on their life. And I'm like, just live your own life and you'll be fine. I swear to you, you're going to wake up the next day.
But everyone is also criminalizing silence.
Criminalizing, like yelling at them for not speaking out about a certain thing.
Yes,
Like, so celebrities are getting shit for that.
yes.
But fuck celebrities.
Why aren't you denouncing X on your Facebook page? You can do it. So why aren't you?
Because I only
Why
got
do you have
two
a problem?
friends.
Why? And my favorite question, right? My favorite underhanded legal maneuver, verbal maneuver of the last 10 years. Why have you got a problem with that? Well, because I believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah, but why do you want that? People
Because
who
it's right.
bad people who are on the wrong side of history don't go to jail like they should or get executed like they should because you can't prove they're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, I don't know if
What's
anybody
wrong with
should
you?
be executed, but
Right. So yeah, so that's my take on morality. It is possible to make morally false or morally true statements, but only within the terms of the rules governing the moral discourse of that particular group at that particular time.
what?
So there's no such thing as a universal morality per se, but that does not preclude the possibility of an approximate moral certainty within the context in which one is actually having a conversation.
What about authenticity? What is your
What about
perception of
authenticity?
authenticity? What is your perception of it?
My perception of authenticity is it's usually claimed by people who don't have any.
Damn.
Because if you're talking about it, that's just you're advertising the fact that it's absent, right? The more you wave the flag, the more you know there's nothing there.
I like to think I have it, but I don't know.
Okay, you got it, Robbie. I just spoke the truth.
What,
By
I
the way,
got it?
what's that logo you got in your shirt there?
It's a peace sign.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Oh, it kind of looks, yeah,
it's a peace sign.
yeah, but it looks kind of phallic.
It's got a sunflower in it and a bee and a bunch of flowers in it.
Anyway, I picked this up in Cambodia. You may not be able to see it. I picked it up in Cambodia. It's like Angkor beer, my country.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. It's one of my favorite shirts. Yeah, okay. So what is it we're talking about now?
It really brings out your eyes.
It does.
Now it's talking about the perception of authenticity.
Why are we talking about this?
Why not?
Okay. Well, what's your view? Define authenticity.
I don't know. I think a lot of people, like, it goes back to the tribe thing. I think a lot of people get upset about sometimes when someone says something that they're trying just to speak their mind. I mean, do you want people that are filtering themselves in front of you, or would you prefer people that were just open about how they feel about things? You get a more genuine thing. It's like people are not happy that certain people might say something, so they want to limit that person's speech, but it's like it doesn't change their thoughts, though. It doesn't change how they feel. You know what I
Yeah, but
mean?
but today. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I could hear you
Okay.
before.
Yeah. Well, I just kind of had to adjust the mic a little bit. Yeah, but I mean, my problem with that, well, it's not my problem with it. I mean, sympathize with that view, but I just think that view is becoming obsolete because what everyone is charging to is basically okay. Um, Jean-Pierre Dupuy wrote a really good book about the history of artificial intelligence and computer and machine learning. Um, and he was actually involved in the French IT industry for quite some time before he became a full-time academic. And his take on all of this is that the secret of AI, the real imperative, the cultural imperative, and the normative imperative behind AI is not building a computer that thinks like a person. It's not has nothing to do with it. The real drive behind it is to create a generation of people who have been trained to think like computers. So we're trying to create a situation in which people will be compelled to imitate computer behavior.
I agree with that.
Because if look, again, this is, you don't want to talk about conspiracy theories. You want to talk about conspiracy theory that nobody was really talking about. Talk about the Great Reset sometime.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't like the language that gets attached to that.
Well, me neither. But I mean, but we can agree upon one thing. Let's call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution, if we are reading the tea leaves correctly, we are in the very early stages of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The turning point was probably machine learning coupled with 3D manufacturing. That was probably when we reached the point of no return, and we've gone into a new historical period, which, just like the industrial or steam engine revolution, in many ways, not completely, of course, but in many ways was discontinuous with what came before. And therefore, there was a very, very long learning slope and, shall we say, attitudinal adjustment period. And that's what we're going through now. And it's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the thing is that if we are going to digitalize all aspects of our social being, which we are doing, like we're doing right now, talking on a podcast with my mic around my head, right? And at the same time, we are developing machine learning and algorithms that will evaluate our behavior. So we are probably sliding into something like a Chinese form of a social credit system, electronically policed and managed. Then what is the goal of human cognition? What will a properly adjusted, normal, correctly behaving human being be like? And it will be one who has been trained or altered in some way, possibly by neural implants, partly by subliminal messaging, mainly by cognitive restructuring in the public schools or through online education, to basically think like a computer. You are will not you will be dissuaded, you will be inhibited, voluntarily inhibited from spending more than 15 minutes on any topic.
Damn, that would suck for me.
That's right, because these broadcasts of yours go on for an hour, even though they seem like 2 years, right? You're not supposed
Damn.
to. You're not.
Ouch.
So in other words, you don't look at anything in depth,
You
but
hurt
you
me.
run through as much stuff as possible, right?
I like to have conversation.
Yeah, I know.
gonna
That's
be
because you're
illegal at
authentic.
some point.
You authentically like authentic conversations because you're
I
authentic.
try to be, but goddamn. I've done 1,500 of these fucking things, but exactly the same throughout all of them. I can't keep that up forever. Trust me.
And I really liked the way in The Flash to indicate when Barry was going backwards in time, he was standing still and his legs were moving in reverse. Do you
I
see
know
that?
that was funny.
I love that.
I love
I thought that was so stupid. I mean, but it was gloriously stupid, you know?
I
But
know.
no, the chrono pit thing, that was really what made the film.
Okay.
Actually, somebody went online and posted something. It was impossible to save all those babies. I mean, even if he was
That's the
moving
part
at
that really got me that I just thought was cringy. I think that was the only time I ever really cringed in a thing. I was like, I get it, but afterwards, like after the scene was over, I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that because it was bad, but then it was also like the way he did it, they kind of explained how like fire was going to hit the baby, so he put him in a microwave, and I was just like, damn, it's just like, but I thought they made the Flash look a little bit like he was on the spectrum.
how do you mean spectrum?
I
I mean,
he was autistic or something because they had him going like this with his hands, and they made him like kind of socially awkward. But I think they hit a little bit more too close to the. It's not really being socially awkward. He would say random things like I don't know, and he would say like something and splatter out. Where I would just go, "What are they trying to do to Barry Allen? Like it's not it's not what the Flash
I
is
think
like.
it was less Barry Allen and more
Like close to
Ezra
Rain Man.
Miller. It was more. I think it was basically it was an inside joke on Ezra Miller's expense
Oh,
because all the problems and stuff.
oh well, this
I said,
was filmed after. I mean, before all that happened.
was it?
Yeah,
Oh, I thought it was concurrent. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
they would
Anyway,
not use him.
he was doing a spoof on himself, I think, is what was going on there. But
Okay.
anyway, um, yeah, of course, my wife knows something about comic books, but she went because I wanted to see it. I want to see. I think that Dune and maybe Oppenheimer are the three movies I'm going to do this summer.
Oppenheimer is going to be a good one.
Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I think should be good.
When the trailer
Um,
played, I was like, "This is going to be called Oppenheimer," and then it popped up. I was like, "Yep, it's called Oppenheimer." Of course,
yeah.
it's just a great name in general.
Well, they weren't going to call it Cillian Murphy.
They were going to call it Disaster
Cillian Murphy
Strikes.
talks to Einstein. Yeah, right. I mean that conversation. That
What are
we're
your
talking about
thoughts
5 seconds there.
What are your thoughts on independent thinking? You think that's going to vanish?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not even sure we ever really had it. When you consider the role that mimesis plays in our interactions. And secondly, no, like I said, it's you don't want to sound paranoid, and you don't want to sound conspiratorial, but if you buy into the historical logic of the fourth industrial revolution, meaning that we've had industrial revolutions before, three of them because it's the fourth one, and it has brought about huge changes in cultural and social logics, then we're going to have to undergo our own. And I really think more and more that I'm thinking about it, I think that the model we will all be carrying in the back of our minds is pushing a button and get a result.
Instant gratification.
Yeah, in part. That's the hedonistic aspect of it, but there's also the cognitive aspect of it. Why can't I produce the outcome that I want? I'm pushing the button. Why is nothing happening? Right. And that's why I think there will probably be, first of all, I'm not sure Americans really tolerate dissent as well as they say that they do. And I've certainly gotten to the point now that if there is one way you can guarantee that you will be killed and suffer a violent death, so if you really want to commit suicide, just walk up to any American, whatever it is, whoever it is, and whatever it is that they really, really want, something they really, really want, even if the law is silent on the topic, and say, you don't have any right to that, to have that. You don't have a right to happiness. You don't have the right to be wealthy.
Fuck, they
You
made
don't
an
have the right to
industry on
have,
happiness.
well, you don't have the right to have the job you want. Whatever. I'm not, not saying people shouldn't have what they want. I'm saying if you tell them you don't have a right to have what you want, you will be dead before you hit the ground.
I don't think that's true. You might be
I
putting a
think it's
little bit
true.
of
And if we'll,
exaggeration.
well, okay, we'll give it 20 years and see where we are.
That's going to scare the hell out of me.
Yeah, me from 20 years. I'm not. You probably won't even be here in 20 years. But I'm just saying. I
We'll
think I
have
feel
you
more
hooked
like.
up to the iron lung, pulled into a movie theater
Yeah. Oh,
style.
yeah. It'll be an iron lung. Like, what's that movie with all the people in the iron lung in it? It started out a really good horror film and started out really, really well. It was set in a sanitarium, the world's most surreal sanitarium. and it was the iron lung chamber sequence that was the main sequence of it, and it was extracting worms that had psychic capacities from the people all locked up in
I
the
don't know,
iron
but that
lungs.
sounds trippy as
It was
hell.
a good, except, but for some reason at the end they botched it somehow. They really blew a great premise. But anyway, yeah, I was thinking about that. Yeah, but yes, no, I think so. I think it's whatever we become, our thinking will become more machinic in its structure, in the way that we process things. And I don't mean we process mechanically. I just think that we think, and of course that's the scary thing about AI, right? I mean, AI is capable of solving problems, but the reason why people don't like switching it on too much is because it tends to reason sociopathically. Like, if the company really will save $5 billion a year by reducing its workforce by 90%, then the AI will do that and destroy tens of thousands of lives in the process, right? Yeah, I see that.
What
Yeah.
do you think this isolates us into like one day where we'll be living in like vaults of like independent societies or all under the United States of America, but just independent groups and villages? I mean, we technically do that now with cities. I think after the pandemic and everything, people started moving into locations where they agreed with some of the restrictions or the lesser restrictions, depending on where it was. You look at a map now, a lot of that map isn't just scattered red and blue. It's kind of like more ordinated and kind of put together in groups. So you're kind of looking at like I feel like we're slowly getting there to where we're really going to start dividing even more, which really sucks. But the
Oh
online
no, no,
platform with the way we
the
communicate.
division process is totally open-ended. Wholly.
But I meant like the way we'll only be able to future communicate will be just through social media and the way we do it now. It's going to be the only way, and that's not a good way to be communicating.
Well, that's a question of what you get used to. The scariest thing ever written, the scariest thought, we're talking about originality and authenticity. The most original, scariest thought of all time was Dostoevsky's one-liner. Man is the only animal who can become completely used to absolutely anything.
Damn.
So it's simply a question of our training. What we used to call education, which is now just training, right? But I mean, look at public education in the United States. What's the main emphasis? Everyone's talking about declining scholastic results and standards, right? Which seems to be true, although I don't really like quantified measurements when it comes to learning or education. I think it's mainly bogus, but something seems to be changing. And if you listen to the people defending teachers' unions and defending the changes in the curriculum in the public schools, the emphasis now upon basically being a good person. It's like sympathy training, empathy training, social justice responsibility training, and it's all based upon essentially heightening affectivity, emotional responsiveness to things, rather than intellectual or clinical responsiveness to things that require knowledge. I see it, that's wrong. Why do you know it's wrong? Because I feel that it is. The end. I mean, I was having a long argument. I'm against capital punishment for a number of different reasons. The main reason being is that I do not believe it is politically sound to allow the state to legally kill its own citizens,
I
no matter
believe
what they've
you.
done. Okay, so I am against capital punishment. But I also understand, or at least I understood, and this is like, 20 years ago, so I may be way out of it, is that you do need to have reasons pro and against so you can actually converse with people on the other side in a rationally constructive manner and maybe come up with a mutually agreeable compromise or something like that, or at least explain yourself. And I was talking to this, transplanted British English expat who was in the United States, and he did what a lot of the English do when they come to the United States. They decide to become moral crusaders because the Americans haven't got, they've let their game down, so they're trying to improve things. Because the English also have an intensely moralistic view of history, being the spawning ground of Puritanism, along with the Netherlands, as we've come to know Puritanism. And he's a dude was, and I was saying, well, he comes out and he's going on evil, 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 evil. And I said, how do you know it's evil? I mean, can you, I'm not going to deny that it is, but I can come up with an argument why I think, or at least it's wrong and not a good thing, a good idea to engage in capital punishment. Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know, but I got an argument to make about it. And they said, what's your argument? I says, I don't need an argument. Fuck philosophy. It's wrong. I'm opposing it. The end. And I said to myself afterwards, I said, well, he's not wrong in the sense that if all you want to do is recruit an activist to be a member of your army fighting for change, whatever that is, whether it's from the left or whether it's from the right, well, that's probably a good attitude to have. But if you're outside of the context of, do we really want to divide our society into nothing more than, nothing other than competing armies, that's your choice.
I will say I agree with the fuck philosophy thing. Mostly just because don't really like talking to philosophers on my show. I think you're probably one that is not at like the others. Um, I've talked to a lot of philosophers I have on my show throughout my show, but there's always becomes a point where they start pushing their view of the world onto you a little bit, and I can't stand that shit. And it just gets like, oh, fuck.
But he meant philosophy as shorthand for theory. I mean, but what he's saying is, I don't need an argument. I'm running on adrenaline here.
Yeah, he's messed up because he comes from another country and he comes here and everything's all so ass backwards to what he's used to.
Right. That's he believe me, he gave that off like pheromones, You could really tell sitting next to this guy, that's how he felt. But at the
About to
same
turn on the
time,
deep throat, aren't you?
but yeah, but isn't that sort of what we're getting into? It's like, this is my story, this is my truth, this is my passion. Well, fine. But what we've done new in all of this is that's all you need. Because there's nothing else. There's nothing else to talk about. What else is there to talk about? It's irrelevant. It just dissuades me. It confuses me. That's not the point. The point is to get to where I want to go.
I don't know what to say to that one.
Well, there was somebody at the New York Times. I read this in the New York Times.
It's captured. Don't listen to it. Don't read it.
Okay. Well, I get stories online, so
you got an
and
email.
I read some of the
They'll
op-eds
never
once
let
in a
you
while.
unsubscribe from their email.
That's for true. Yeah, no, there's no. They got the CIA's got its hooks in me. Okay, I'm gonna be stuck with the New York Times op-ed updates for the rest of my life. But I do read them once in a while, and I do not know the person's name, but this was quoted in the New York Times. So just saying that this is coming from an op-ed published in the New York Times, that it was some senior female editor at either, and I'm gonna mention because it's female, because she mentions men in this story, the anecdote, at either the Washington Post or the New York Times. And the person writing the op-ed was talking about that other person, the editor at one of the other papers, or either the Times or the Post, published her New Year's resolution. And her New Year's resolutions had two parts. So the first one was, do everything I can to cultivate and develop my friendships with other people and learn to become more harmonious and forgiving. The second resolution was, kill all men.
She broke it already. She already fucking broke it. She broke it faster than people that.
But you're being naive about it again. She hasn't broken it. That's the thing. She has not broken it, because both reflect her affectivity, her affections, not effections, affections. That's where she wants to go. See, if patriarchy is the source of evil, patriarchy is therefore the wrong side of history, even though it's prevailed for the last 12 to 15,000 years. But getting rid of it is the key to solving the first condition. The first thing you have to do, the prerequisite for solving all of the other major problems, is to dismantle patriarchy, or at least disable it in some way. Then, and that's what you believe, and I'm not saying you're wrong at all, but I'm saying if that is your belief, you are moved into basically a revolutionary situation. And if you are a genuine revolutionary, then you cannot compromise. Revolutionaries do not compromise. They may wait. They can make strategic decisions. That means they kind of like power down for a while, or keep their mouths shut, or censor their own thoughts so that nothing leaks out that harms the cause.
Would you
But at
call
the
me
end of the day,
would you call me a revolutionary?
no.
Good.
Good, because you're wearing like a peace shirt, and you're so obviously giving the game away. You can't possibly be the thing that
Can't you
think
tell
that you
this
might
is
be.
This is a false thing. I'm doing this so people don't see I'm violent.
Yeah, it's a white op, right?
Honestly,
You're throwing it out
it was
there
on
to.
sale.
You're not lying, but it's misdirection.
It was $6. I had to buy it.
Okay.
I was like, shit.
You know how we know that's too much information.
My other one is a Disney one, and I wear that when I want, because I won't talk about Disney because I'm getting a little scared from them.
Scared for them or scared of them?
Scared of them. They got a lot of power. I'm realizing. I'm looking through some of these damn Walt Disney documents. I'm like, holy shit, what are you guys connected to? You German
No, they
sons of
are. They
bitches.
really are one of the world's most powerful
I know
businesses.
it's scary. Um, no, I think there's like a lot of things. I think like debates. I don't like debates. I know people go, well, debate it and solve it like this. I'm like, no, you can't debate things. You guys are never going to agree. So you might as well just share your perspectives and have an equal conversation about it. So at least you can see what the other person is seeing. Like that's all anyone should be really prescribing to, not trying to change people's minds, but trying to understand someone's viewpoint. Just so you go, okay, I don't agree with that, but I understand where you're coming from now.
Right.
Or the world goes to shit.
Well,
Do you have
if
hope
you,
for it? I'm a pessimist.
oh yeah, no, I don't have any hope for it. Well, I mean, by hope, I mean, I wouldn't even say really I'm a pessimist in the sense. Well, let me put it this way: by American standards, I'm probably a pessimist. By European standards, I'm probably just a hardcore realist. And really, what I would describe myself as is simply a fatalist. I believe in historical determinism, or I should say, the deterministic nature of history, minus individual spontaneous discontinuities that can emerge, because complex systems can behave erratically and randomly and unpredictably over time. But in general, I have a deterministic theory of history. It's not specifically a Marxist one, although obviously economic factors play an important role in that. And class struggle plays an important role in that. But I mean, then you can deconstruct class, just like you can deconstruct gender or race if you really put your mind to it. But no, I'm just a fatalist. I mean, I just, how do we stop these trends? How do you get Americans off that their cultural axiom, their first assumption, is a moralistic or a moralizing view of history? That's why one reason why Americans will never be done with conspiracy theory, because conspiracy theory, among other things, is an instrument of moral censure. Either the government is evil or that which resists the government is good, because when you frame something in conspiratorial terms, you tend to be even unconsciously evoking moral absolutes. That's why we've got to get Nixon. Or getting Nixon is the key to everything else.
Makes a little bit of sense.
Okay.
I want to ask before, because it's like my last question. We got to get back to Deep Throat at some point. Mark Felt, whatever happened to him?
I actually am not sure. He
Is he?
passed away a few years ago, but I don't really know what happened to him after he left the FBI.
I'm curious if he ever spoke out about other people being Deep Throat.
I am not aware of that.
Okay. I know we kind of covered a lot here. I appreciate the time, Eric.
Okay.
Sure, I'll have you back on again. But
Sure.
when what do you want to promote? You said your new book. You had a new book coming out
Oh
in
yeah,
any
thanks
other
for
links?
reminding me. Yeah, I got my new books on James Ellroy. It's entitled "The View from Howard's Fuckpad."
Are you serious?
Yes, I am
I
serious.
fucking love that, dude.
That you will not believe. Oh, and the cover. On the
If you
cover. I mean,
send me, if
I
you send
designed
me
it
it, I
myself.
will post it
I
right there.
designed it with one of the. Oh yeah, no. Too. You can download it. It's online now. You can see it on the net.
I want a
It's
paperback version that has some deep throat jokes in it.
well, there are a couple of things like that. I mean, not exactly like that, but kind of like that. Yeah. It's called. The title is "The View from Howard's Fuckpad." Howard being Howard Hughes. The View from, and a few other things. The View from Howard's Fuckpad, the Deep State Bad White Men, and the Weird Noir of James Ellroy. And one reason Weird Noir is kind of a name that I kind of coined, although some other people have been kind of thinking along similar lines, which is sort of like the fusion of crime literature with horror literature with crime literature, crime writing and horror writing, right? So what's one of the things I'm interested in is the exact points of intersection. Just like in The Flash, oh, and all these multiverses, like all those noodles of spaghetti that all overlap with
That's
each
was the
other.
best scene was Michael Keaton
There
doing
are
that.
certain intersectional points that just have to be there no matter what.
They're
Okay.
inevitabilities.
Inevitabilities, or what we would call fate. Okay. And like, and what it means is that on Tim Burton universe Earth, General Zod is going to kill Supergirl, spoiler alert, no matter what. right? It just can't be undone, right? Everyone just goes crazy, but you can't undo it. No matter how many times you go back in time, you're not going to change it because it's always got to come out. This is one outcome that has to be there, okay, for that universe to be what it is, okay. So, what does it have anything to do with my book? Okay, yeah. So I mean, I'm coming out with a book. So I'm interested in the points of interface, or the, what do you call them? What do they call them in the movie again?
Inevitabilities.
Inevitabilities between crime literature and horror literature. Okay, and that's what I mean by weird noir. I did one on Lovecraft. I did one on Elroy, and it is coming out with Punctum Books in October because I designed the cover, co-designed the cover with one of the editors of Punctum, and we came up with something that was so hideous, no joke, that we decided this is not good for Easter. It's going to have to coincide with Halloween. So the book's it was advertised for spring 2023, but it's actually going to come out in October 2023, and it's at Punctum Books, and you can go online and look it up, and you can see the cover and everything. And it's just like, it's incredible. I mean, it's like the greatest thing ever written.
And once October rolls around, we'll have you back just to be able to discuss it.
Yeah, if not before, and I'll tell the other guys at the other podcast all about it too.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
Thanks for cheating on me. I wanted
No problem.
exclusives.
Deep Throat.
Oh, Deep Throat.
He's a rambling man.
I want to make sure I link your links in the description. Eric, seriously, it's been a pleasure again, man. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blink podcast. Stay tuned for next episode.